Welcome everyone, today I'd like to show you a rendering tutorial for Photoshop. I just drawed some lines in my drafting software and I just dragged and dropped it into Photoshop as a PDF file. I couldn't see the lines very well, so I created a stroke effect with 3 black pixels, so now I can see the lines. The stroke is a blending option, so you right click on a layer, blending options is the very first point, and then there you will find the stroke. And I put a white background behind it, and that's my starting point, my base. Now create a new layer by using a shortcut. It's Ctrl, Shift, Alt and N for new layer. And I just create my own layer structure here, water, grass, buildings and whatever. And I give them some specific colors. You can change the color of a layer by right clicking on the layer, and then you just find the colors in a list. And maybe you will notice during this video that I recorded the video first and now I'm re-recording or commenting my own video, so I know what I will do next. I go into the base area or base layer and I press on W for having the magic wand tool. And I just click on all the areas that I like to select, where in this case I want to have blue color or water in. And then I go into the right layer, in this case the water layer. I press G for the filling bucket and I just fill in some blue color there. And I do the same thing right now with grass. I select all the grass areas. I go on the grass layer, I press G for the filling bucket, choose a green color and just fill in the green color. And I also do the same thing with the streets, but you always have to start at the base layer because there are the lines. And I use white color for the streets. I started here with gray and then I thought, oh no, white will look a lot nicer than this gray tones. And you can always press Ctrl and D to deselect a selection that you've made. These are all very basic Photoshop shortcuts, but they are so useful and powerful, and of course you always need them all the time. So if you're not that familiar with Photoshop and you're watching this video as some kind of beginner's tutorial to create a Siteplan rendering, then please write all these shortcuts down because you will need them all the time. So I repeat the same thing for the buildings here, but in this case I have this roof and I pretend to have the sunlight coming from the upper right corner. So the left side of the roof has to be a little bit darker than the right side, and the flat roofs in this drawing are, it's something in between. It's a middleish gray tone. And I forgot the round building here. And I add a new layer with the bike lane that I want to have in, some kind of red or orange tone, maybe a rusty tone. But not too strong, because I don't like to have really strong colors on a side plan or maybe in any kind of drawing. It's always better to have some smooth colors, and you can use very strong colors to stick something out of the drawing, of the image, to emphasize something. But in this case it was not my intention to emphasize the bike lane here. And I add a new layer for the bridge. This has a very good reason. The bridge later gets its own drop shadow because the bridge is some meters above the water, and I can only achieve the automatical drop shadow with having with having pixels on a layer. So I just create a bridge layer and I go into base and I select the bridge itself and I fill in some white color. And I start here with textures right now. First of all, the water textures. I have this image here from a satellite shot. I think it's from Sydney. So if somebody from Sydney is watching this, maybe you recognize this area. And I'm still transforming it, and I pull the water so big that it overcasts all the water area, but I recognize that it's getting pixely, and I redo the same step, but I don't make the layer or the drawing so big anymore. And now I use the stamping tool. The shortcut for it is S or the clone stamp. I think it's clone stamp, not stamping tool, to create a fully water texture here. When you have the clone stamp selected, you press the Alt button to select a starting point or original point, and then you left click somewhere else and you copy your original starting point. That's how the stamping tool works, or the clone stamp. And I add in the same texture as I did before, because I now want to have these boats inside my marina area, and I just transform them. Transforming shortcut is Control and T, like transform. It's quite easy to remember. And I put it on a right size, or on a size which seems to be right, and I erase the edges of this layer here, or of this texture, whatever. Because my PDF had an edge, some pixels of edge, I have this white edge in the whole drawing here. I will do something against it or about it at the very end of the video, or I guess even after I just stop the video or I stop recording. But that's no problem at all right now. So right now I have the eraser tool selected again. The shortcut is just E for eraser, and I start with shift painting. I click on one point, I hold down shift, and I click on another point, and Photoshop automatically draws a straight line between the 2 points, and that's the so-called shift painting. There's another form of shift painting. If you hold down shift before you start painting, you automatically can draw in a horizontal or in a vertical line, in case you hold down shift all the time. So I put all the water textures together to a new group. You just select all the layers you want to have in one group and press Ctrl and G. And I call that water and make it blue again. And I do basically the same steps with the grass. I add in my standard grass texture, which I use in every Siteplan I do. I copy it with pressing Ctrl and J, and I merge them together with Ctrl and E, and then I press Ctrl and T for transforming to make it a little bit taller. And now I use a layer mask. I fill in the layer mask with black color, so I couldn't see anything of my grass texture anymore. Would not have been necessary in this case, because I already knew I would work deconstructive and not in a constructive way, but it doesn't matter. So right now I have my grass texture there, and I go into adjustments, and I choose the hue saturation filter to make some slight changes of saturation and lightness here, a little bit brighter and a little bit stronger or more colorful. And then I start dodging and burning on my grass texture just before I realized that I hadn't finished my grass textures yet. So I think in a second I will recognize, oh, I wanted to create a hill on the right side next to the bridge, and maybe it will look cooler if I add some new or other textures, grass textures here, some rougher stuff. Maybe the left side of the drawing or the left side of the bridge is mown and the right side isn't, so it just looks a little bit rougher. And I rasterized the layer so I could edit it, and I delete all parts that are not on the standard grass map that I created in the very first steps. And I choose a layer mask again and I fill it with black color so there's nothing there. And because this texture had a very different and a very strong outstanding color than the other grass texture on the bottom, I choose a very soft brush to draw in the texture very slightly and softly. So you can change the brush if you, first of all, you can select the brush tool by clicking on just B for brush. And then you can right click anywhere and then you can change your brush. And you can select a new brush by pressing enter. It's very important because many people do this wrong. And you can change opacity of a brush or of an eraser or of a filling bucket or whatever by just, not what I'm doing right now, by just clicking on the numbers of your numpad. So if you have chosen a brush and then you click on 3, just like I did some steps ago, then you have an opacity of 30%. And so you can draw in the texture using a very soft and smooth brush with not much opacity in your layer mask. Just like I did here, and I'm just adding another texture. Diversity is very good in textures. Sometimes it destroys the textures, but in this case I think it worked quite well. I also add some dirt here to the very big triangular shaped form or triangular shaped grass piece here. Again, the same steps, rasterize it, use a layer mask, fill it with black color and then draw in some of the dirt with a white brush, which is very smooth, in this case 30% opacity. Just go over the areas where you want to see dirt. There you can see the sharp edge, and I just pressed on X to change the foreground and the background color to have the black color again, and I out-drawed the sharp edges. Now I'm finished, it looks very fine, I guess. And I merged them all together. I know that's very deconstructive, but at this point I knew I won't change anything yet, and I just go back to dodge and burn, which means I make some parts brighter and some parts darker. Dodge and burn is a very powerful tool which you can always use to add some diversity and some life to your image, I would say. Because if you have a very flat texture or flat colors like the basic grass texture was, your whole image will look some kind of flat and boring. But just some very simple basic dodging and burning can change this, and it adds a lot more life to your images. I put all the grass textures together into one group again, and then I start with the shadows, I guess. Yes, I go on the buildings and I right click it and I go into blending options, and the last point of the blending options is the drop shadow. And you can see in real time how the drop shadow changes by pulling on the little regulators there. there's no formula for it. Just play around until you're satisfied, until it looks quite realistic or quite fine, whatever. Press OK, and now I copy this layer style. I right click on buildings and go to copy layer style, go to the bridge and paste the layer style. Now I have exactly the same layer styles here, or blending options here. Doesn't look very good here because the bridge is a little bit longer, or the shadow has to be a little bit longer. I tried to fix it by using Ctrl and T, transforming, but I recognized that this was not the best idea, and I quitted the transforming, and so I start drawing in some white pixels by hand. I use L for the selection tool. I select some part of the bridge here, because the way you can see is underneath the bridge, so this all has to be white. My brush is still on 30% opacity, now I change it to 100. And this looks a little bit better, but now I have to change the shadow, and for this I rasterize the layer style, so I cannot change the shadow, the drop shadow, the layer style anymore. It's part of the drawing, it's pixelized, it's rasterized, and I use the eraser, shortcut E, to erase the shadow there, and I also have to make an angled shadow here, so it seems like the street is going up and it reaches a specific level and it stays in this level. And I also have this, this messy corner here, and it's not the best way. I tried to fix this because I selected and I press Ctrl and J to create a new layer and copy the pixels that I had selected from the original layer. And I use E to erase the edge here, and it doesn't look very fine. But then I zoomed out and I saw nobody can see this, so it's okay. Sometimes you have these messy edges in your drawings, in your visualizations, in your plans. It's so small nobody can see it, and I didn't want to put a lot of more effort into this situation. And yes, that's the point where I see zoomed out, no one recognizes it, so it doesn't matter. So what do I do next? I guess I go into the grass again, but I'm not quite sure. Let's see, yes. And I create a new layer by clicking on Ctrl, Shift, Alt and N. And it's for the height lines, because there I had the idea to add some height lines by hand. Of course, this is a fictional project. There are no real height lines. And I used the shift painting method, which I told you about before, to draw in some white lines with a very hard brush. And it looks very polygonal here, not very smooth, no curved edges, no round splines or whatever. And I think that looks really great. And my thoughts on this were, as I was painting it, when I have to paint height lines on a real project next time by myself, which doesn't really happen very often, because most times you get the height lines from your GIS software or whatever. But if in case I have to draw it by myself, I think I would not use the splines in ArchiCAD or which program you use, whatever. I don't want to have these curved edges. I like these very sharp and polygonal height lines. I think it looks very cool, and it definitely adds a lot more presence or life to the building, to the image. I'm sorry. It makes a huge difference. So right now I'm not sure what I'm doing, but I guess yes, I start with the trees. I only use one tree here, and I change the angle so the sun comes from the upper right corner, so the bright side of the tree is the upper right side. And first of all, I change hue and saturation. I make some color changes, which I thought in this case would fit very good to the underground, to the grass texture, or to the image in its whole being. And I change the size by pressing Ctrl and T, and then I start copying it by pressing Ctrl and J, and after pressing Ctrl and J I immediately press on V for the move tool. Then I move it, and then I press Ctrl and J again, I press on V, I move it. And that's what I do here for, I can tell you right now, I think 101 times. Ctrl and J, V, move, Ctrl and J, V, move, every time and every time and every time. And somewhere in between I change the size. Yes, right now I change from the big tree to a middle size. Same steps again, Ctrl J, V, move, Ctrl J, V, move, and so on. And at some point I will change the size again to a smaller tree. And I just use one tree in this case, with one angle and even one color, and with just 3 sizes. So if you want to add more diversity, more realism to your Siteplan rendering, it's very simple. Add different trees, not only one. Add a couple of different colors, and of course more sizes than 3. And then you would have more diversity, more realism in your trees. But to be fair, I think when this here is finished, it doesn't look that bad. And I also use a little, let's say trick, but you will see in 2 or 3 minutes, I guess. Let's see what I'm doing here. Yeah, that's the point where I changed from the middle-sized tree to a small tree. So I had in mind to have this way or this road here as some kind of avenue. So I added trees in a specific distance next to the roads. And again, Ctrl J, V, move, Ctrl J, V, move, Ctrl J, V, move. Three trees on this parking lot, whatever it is. And the avenue is finished, but we're still at 74, and I'm quite sure it was 101 copies. And finally we're at 101. And what I'm doing now is merging them all together by selecting the one at the top, holding down Shift, click on the first one here on the bottom, and press Ctrl and E to merge them all to one layer. This is my trees layer, and the reason behind the merging is quite simple. I right now use the trick I mentioned before. I use the clone stamp to create some diversity to the shape, and of course to add some density here, so it looks more like a wood and not just like some single trees that are standing on a meadow. And the second trick I use to make the trees more realistic or more diverse, I guess you will see it in a minute. Yeah, the second trick is dodging and burning again. So you add some differences in the color and in the lightness or brightness of the trees, and it adds a little more diversity and realism again. And another big advantage of having all the trees together on one layer, you will get to see in another minute again. No, I just tell you, it's to create shadows of the trees in one click or with using one click. So I'm not sure if I'm doing it now or if I'm doing it later, but just right click on the trees layer, go into the blending options and use the drop shadow, and then you have a drop shadow for all the trees. Of course, the other way that I usually go is creating one tree, adding the drop shadow at the very first step, and then I copy and move the trees with its shadows. The big disadvantage with this method is that you have to work from in this case from the right upper corner to the left bottom corner, because the shadow of a tree cannot be on top of another tree. So it looks like the tree is double the size of the other tree, and this wouldn't make any kind of sense. But in this case it's quite easy, because you can use the blending option for the whole layer. And now I add in some cars. It's from my own car package that you can buy and download at the QreativeHome.com website, or just follow the links below in the video description. These are just a couple of cars, and I put them all together at once, and I select them all and press Ctrl and T so I can transform the size of them all in one step. And when I have the right size, I just select one. I start here with the VW Touareg, and I press Ctrl and T to transform. I can also turn them here, and V for moving. So I take this Golf and move it on the street here at the marina, and Subaru. Ctrl and T, turn it to the right direction, and you can press enter or click on the hook. And I also have this Porsche 911, which is driving next to the bike lane because the Porsche driver wants to cross the bridge. and this Corvette Stingray. And I guess I forgot the BMW X5 at first. Yes, because I grouped all the cars and I forget the BMW. But right now I put the BMW, I guess, to the parking lot in the left area of the image. Yes. And at this point I saw that the car layer or car group had to be underneath the trees. First of all, I merged them all together to one group. So right now I add the drop shadow to the trees. I was talking about this a couple of minutes ago. And the same thing that I did on the buildings. Just play around. There is no exact formula. You cannot say type in distance and spread and size X. Just play around. You see, this quite looks okay, that looks good. Press on OK, and a shadow adds so much more realism to a drawing. And yeah, I did the editing, or not editing, I did the copy and paste thing here with the layer styles for the cars. But of course the shadow of the cars is not as big as the one of the trees, so I have to change everything again. And I just starting by one car, and again right click, copy layer style, select all the other cars, right click, paste layer style, and now they all have the same drop shadow. I thought the cars are too dark and I just added some lightness with the hue and saturation filter. Just a little bit. So they are not that strong in the whole image anymore. They don't appear that strong. Now I add in some grunge textures, and I always do that to add again a little bit more life to an image. I put this abstract grunge texture on multiply, and I rasterize it, and no, I don't rasterize it, I just use the mask, the layer mask, and I want to have this grunge map only to be seen on the grass. So I make all black, I select the grass, and I make the grass areas white. And this is way too strong, so I just pull down the opacity here, make it to very, very smooth, just a little bit of texture. Just 14% in this case. You see the difference. It's not much, but I think it looks very neat. And I also add some texture to the water, because the water texture here, even if it's a satellite photo, it looks very, very flat. And I use this grunge map here and the same steps. I put it into soft light mode. And I again use the layer mask. Right now I didn't turn everything black at the first step. I just put the black into the areas I want to see. I press Ctrl and E to deselect, and press Ctrl and E to invert the colors. And now I have the white area where the texture should appear on. And I just play around with the opacity again. And as you can see, in comparison to what the water was before, it adds a lot more texture, a lot more depth and more life, and of course still some realism to the drawing. And at the very last step, I merge all the layers together without destroying all the original layers by pressing Ctrl Shift Alt and E, and I go into my Topaz Adjust 5 plugin, Topaz Labs plugin. You can buy this for I think 50 or 60 euros or dollars, and I just play around with the presets here. Most times I do not change anything of the presets. I like this here, detail strong. I press OK and I wait until it's at 100%, and of course it's too strong for me, and I just use opacity again to mix the new Topaz Labs filter with the original drawing. And I leave it at 29% because I think it looks good for me. And finally, that's it. Thank you for watching.